Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Lodgge Podcast. I am your host, Scott Milley, and I am joined today by industry veteran, artist, and MTG extraordinaire, Jeff Evans. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Scott. Doing great.
So Jeff is the former CEO of Tiny Titan Studios, and he is currently working on their next game, or his next game, Ember Knights. With an extensive list of artistic experience in the video game industry and a recent affinity for running an esteemed tabletop lounge, which we'll get more into later, Jeff is one of the busiest people in the industry. So Jeff, thank you for joining me today for today's talk. And without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So I wanted to kick it off with a quick question for you, Jeff. So with Valentine's Day around the corner and it being that time of year, I wanted to get your take on what are some of your favorite co-op games. And your answer can't be Ember Knights.
Oh, dang. That was my number one go-to.
Oh, no.
Favorite co-op games. Are you talking video games or board games or whatever?
Let's go with video games, but definitely throw in some board games.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. I'll be honest. I'm more of a PvP kind of player.
Really?
But that said, you know what? I did just get back into Diablo 2, which is a fantastic co-op game.
Resurrected, right? I assume?
Yeah, Resurrected, yeah.
Yeah.
So, funny little story. I played Diablo 2 intensely when I was younger. So this was right about when I was going to college, and I ended up paying for a semester of college by playing Diablo 2. So this is way back in like 2000.
Wow.
Must have been 2000, I guess. So I was playing the game. I was playing on ladder mode, and I had a pretty high up mage, so I was doing a lot of runs and finding all these cool items. And I was hanging out in the trading post all the time. Like I love doing like the wheeling and dealing stuff. So I loved being in there, just looking for deals, going, "Hey, oh, that's a great item. I'll pick up that. I'll trade for this or whatever." Like I'm building this perceived value. And the game actually evolved. If you're familiar with it, it evolved into this like item that became the currency of the actual online experience. It was called a Stone of Jordan. So everything translated to, oh, that's 2 Stones of Jordan, or that's 3 Stones of Jordan for that item. So I'd be wheeling and dealing, going, oh, that one normally goes for 3. I can pick it up for 2 here because they're looking to get rid of it in a pinch or whatever, and then I could trade. And so I built this inventory of Stones of Jordan. I must have had like hundreds of them. And eventually, one person was like, "Hey, I need a Stone of Jordan. I'll pay $15 for one." I was like, I'm like, "How are you going to give me $15?" I'm like, I'll take the bait. You know, I don't even know. I must have been like 18 at the time, 17, 18 or something. I'm like, I'll take the bait. So they're like, okay, hop into a game. They're like, okay, go to this site, paypal.com, sign up,
Oh my God.
and I'll send you $15. So I alt tab and I open a browser. And I'm like, okay, paypal.com. I'm looking at the site. I'm like, it looks pretty good. I'm like,
It looks legit.
Yeah. I'm like, register. You got to remember, this is like almost at the start of PayPal too, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that would have been at like the beginning of all of this.
Yeah, this was very, very new. Even the internet, really. Like it was 2001. So it's still just really early on. So I register on PayPal and I'm like, shows my account balance at bank. I'm like, this is super like pro if they're just trying to fish one of these items up. Because I could probably farm maybe 1 or 2 of them, maybe an hour or so would it work out to. So I was like, it was pretty good for, just going to college and all that. So I was like, okay, here's my account. Send me $15. They're like, okay, sent. So I alt tab over, I hit refresh. I'm like, says I got $15. I'm like, okay, here's your item. Then I hit withdrawal, and it's like, oh, it'll take 3 to 4 days or 3 to 5 days. I was like, okay, cool, whatever. Just went about my business. 3 to 5 days later, I check my bank account. I see $15 actually hit it, and then it's just, light bulb went off. I was like, holy crap.
This is how I'm making money.
Yeah. Oh yeah, now I'm just like, I'm selling them for 14 each. I just started like trying to like, I'm like, I gotta like move these while I can, right? So yeah, I ended up in a couple weeks, I made about $2,000 US just selling these Stones of Jordan. But it was like I was going to college or right about then, and it would hit the weekend, and I'd be playing from like 7 in the morning till like 1 in the morning, kind of thing. Just like my eyes are like, I'm just playing the game, trying to find these items, trying to wheel and deal, building all these Stones of Jordan. And so I eventually sold them off. I can't remember if I did have a hardcore character, but I can't remember if that was the one that was on the Stones of Jordan. But I remember my hardcore character, I got them really high up. It was like level 91. And then it died in a leg spike, and my heart just sank. I was like, oh no, that character's like gone for good, right? So at that point, I was like, I quickly scrambled, hit Alt F4, came back in. My dude was actually dead, and I was just like, oh, I uninstalled the game. No, I was just defeated by the game. Then I was like, okay, I'm out. I'm clean.
And I'm
I'm
out.
off Diablo. Yeah, and that was about it. And then my buddy was playing Resurrected. He's like, yo, man, you check out Resurrected? I was like, yeah, it looks pretty cool. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll pick it up and play it. And then it was just like, hook it up to my base.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like you're relapsing at that point.
Oh,
like
totally.
That's what that feels like.
Yeah. So I mean, that was a very long answer to like what co-op games, but it really goes back to that's got to be like one of the most fun experiences playing a game I've had is just like
making real
venturing
money
with your buddy. Yeah, totally. So yeah,
that's the epitome of the entrepreneurial spirit, though. Like you literally you found a way to make what you love to do work for you. Like that's I think that becomes kind of a theme in the rest of your career of being in video games, right?
Yeah. So like at that time too, I was still very much into like I'd go around to all the pawn shops looking for video games, like deals on used games. And I remember picking up like Nintendo games for like a couple bucks here and there, and then I'd sell them on eBay. And eBay at that time too, the US conversion was crazy. It was like 50% higher than what Canadian was. So I was like using the math going, hey, I could buy something for $20 here, sell it for 20 US, and I'm still making $10.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to like all the pawn shops in my spare time and all that, and slinging video games, and then selling some Stones of Jordan. So yeah, it was always like that's kind of like the meta hobby I had was always like business oriented in some degree.
Yeah, that makes sense though. The thing is, you're doing something like that, but it's 1,000% illegal, or sorry, legal.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, and like that's a really good way to do that.
Those businesses, Scott.
No, not today. Maybe the next podcast.
Yeah.
That was not the answer that I was expecting. But yeah, no, I agree. For me, it's like some of my favorite co-op games of all time. Like I started playing Diablo 3 with my sister and my partner, and like that was an absolute blast. It's like one of our favorite things to do. And then right now, me and my partner are playing Spiritfarer, and just having that second character, right, and just having Dandelion, like the cat, like just running around and like collecting things, and like they've added a lot of updates. So like shout out to Thunder Lotus, like that's such a fun little co-op. Like I miss couch co-op so much, right? And like even like Borderlands, like I'm not all about the humor, but I really just love the organic split screen where you can just sit with friends, and then also having that like accessibility feature where like you can have one person playing on medium and one person playing on easy, and you're playing in the same world. So like my sister and her boyfriend are doing that, and like she doesn't play a lot of games, so she's able to play on easy. He's on medium. He still has the difficulty and the challenge, and then she's like right at her level, and it's perfect. And like I really wish more games would like really accept that and like start to look at that as an avenue and be like, hey, you really want other people to play with you, but not everyone's going to be at your level. If I'm playing Destiny with some friends, like some of my friends are way better, some of my friends are worse, and like I like being able to have that middle ground that you can play with anyone, because that's the whole point of video games, right? It's kind of bring everybody in. It shouldn't just be Nintendo that's doing that to these family friendly games, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think there's been a big push recently, and it's still, I'd say, kind of niche, but big push for accessibility in terms of stuff like that. Like
100%.
Even these games that are meant to be hardcore, it's like, hey, do you want to play this on easy mode just so you can actually enjoy it? Hades is a prime example of that, right? Where it's a hardcore roguelike, but it's like you throw on easy mode. Yeah, exactly. And it's like I just want to have fun and enjoy this content, and I think that's one of the things that actually helped really open the gap to what type of gamer would actually approach that game. Like they made roguelikes probably the most accessible on scale out of any of the roguelikes in recent games, right? And I think that's part of it, right? It's just that narrative focus, that the accessibility to make it like God mode for people who are more casual or newer to the genre and stuff like that. So I think we're going to see more and more of that as things go on. I think it's just going to become kind of the norm. It's like play the game the way you want to play it.
Because that's been such a major conversation, especially I'd say more recently, but a lot of the From Software games, right? Where people, that whole difficulty argument of like, well, that's the point, and like I only want to, like, you only can feel like you achieve something because you're beating something so difficult. And it's like, well, don't you want more people to enjoy the thing that you love? And then it gets gatekeepy, and it's like that whole problem. So it's like it's an interesting conversation.
I was just talking about that, I think, with one of my designers here too, and we were saying it's crazy because you have all the, like the Souls-like games, right? Where it's like they're incredibly hardcore, incredibly hard, and very punishing. But it's accepted. And it's like, if you as developers make a game a little too hard, they're like, this game sucks. You know, it's like, it's way too hard. It's like, there's like a threshold that they carved out this niche where it's like, it's okay for them to make these super punishing games. But I think if the average person, like if you don't pull it off perfectly, it's just going to be slammed that this game is way too hard. It's not fun. Da 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 da. Right. So
I think Cuphead like really like rode that line of exactly
yeah,
that. Like it's known to be incredibly difficult, but it just happens to be that like perfect balance that it's like it is still widely accepted. And I think that's near impossible to do. And yeah, from literally doesn't matter what they put out, Sekiro, Bloodborne, it doesn't matter. The more the punishing, the better. And things I'm worried about with Elden Ring is that I guess it's gonna be the first one I'm really gonna dive into, just because like it speaks to me much more than the other ones did. But I feel like since it's more open world and they said they're trying to make it less stressful, even if it's a little bit easier, people are going to lose their minds that it's too easy.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't you want more people to be able to play it? But I definitely want there to be that.
But that's what creates
that
their market though too, right? If they made it more accessible, it might like kill that market. So it's a fine balance. Like the first Dark Souls game I actually played, or Souls-like game, was I did play a little bit of Bloodborne, and I remember I liked it until the point where it's like, oh, I spent 40 minutes and then died, and it's like I just lost that 40 minutes, and I'm just at a point now where it's like I do not have the time where it's like I can easily lose 40 minutes and I'll just do it again. Like when I was younger, absolutely, I would love those types, but it's a little trickier for me now. But I did get into Dark Souls 3 probably about a year or so ago, and I was playing with my with a couple buddies actually, and I never played like a Dark Souls game. I played Bloodborne, which was similar, but never a Dark Souls game. So I remember we played it for like co-op from the get-go. So I'm thinking like, yeah, hey, I'm not bad at this. This is a pretty cool game and all that. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna play a little on my own. They couldn't play for a bit, and I think we were probably maybe about halfway through the game or something, and I was trying to beat this boss on my own. And oh my God, I got my ass handed to me. And it took me about 2 hours to get over it. But it was this stubborn, like, okay, I'm going to try. Like, I think I can do it. And when I did do it, it was like that felt really rewarding because I finally did it. But it was funny because I was totally carried for the first half of the game, not realizing how much I was actually carried. Because it's like I should have.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I'm great. Yeah, no,
I'm pretty good at this. I had no business being in that fight. Like, so. It's a really interesting study case just in terms of like difficulty and acceptability from the audience.
I agree. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. Certain people, it's fully accepted and expected and almost demanded, and then you have others that they'll get raked over the coals for it, and it's like that's not what people want. But yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. I think it's something that comes up. It's like a 3-month cycle in game dev. Raise the same conversations, always come back around. Another game comes out, and the conversation spikes up again. And especially right now with the new From game, that's inevitable. I like how that kind of also came back around to the co-op question in the first place.
Nice.
So one of the things I always like to get into near the beginning is kind of where it all started before we get to where you are now. So I think it's actually kind of fun because this is episode 6, and one of the places you worked was Digital Illusions, which our previous guest, Demir Slogar, worked for, and Digital Extremes, where Danielle Sokolowski, our first guest,
the full suite of the digitals. Yeah,
exactly. I love that we already have people. It's such a small industry in Ontario, and I think that's going to become more and more evident the more of these we do. But you started with your school in animation, and then you found yourself working at DICE, which was called at the time Digital Illusions. What were some of the biggest takeaways you took from those jobs, and what did they teach you that gave you enough confidence to then co-found your own studio?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'm gonna like backstep it because I think a lot of that stuff also came like earlier in my life too, right? Like I think I was always surrounded by a little bit by the business, like with the wheeling and dealing with the pawn shops and stuff like that. My father early on really kind of sort of, I don't want to say trained me, but like exposed me to stuff like that. Like we'd go to flea markets and he'd teach me to wheel and deal. We'd have a coffee table with my brother, myself, and him, and we'd all have our Matchbox toys, and we would negotiate. Like he knows we would want a certain one because it looks so cool, and then he'd get the better end of the deal, and he'd end up with more cars at the end, right? But it's just those things where it's like it really kind of just planted some of that business stuff in me from the get-go. So when I was in my early teens, I was actually making games all on my own too. So I taught myself how to code, and I was doing art and all that. So I did go to school for art, but I would always say like I always just wanted to make games. It was like art was a path I got into 3D and I enjoyed it, but ultimately I always just wanted to make games. Like I would write my own game designs up and do some drawings for them, whatever I could draw for it, and then I'd try and make it and do prototypes. So that was something that I was always interested in. So when I decided to go to school, because I was familiar with 3D, I chose the path of going for digital media art at Seneca, and that was a good foundation. I busted my butt, right? Like I was getting up at probably like 5:30 in the morning because I lived in Waterloo and commuted to Toronto, and then driving to Toronto and took the class there. And when I get home, all my buddies were going out to the bars and partying at that age, and I'd be working on a 3D character till 1, 2 in the morning, sleep, get up, and do it all over again, right? Like I was just so obsessed with this thing. So I think the teacher saw some of that, and he helped get me a job in a TV and film studio in Toronto called Elliott Animation before I even finished college. So it was like in the last like semester I started working there. So I got a little bit exposed. That's how I got into the industry, and then I found out about an opportunity, total like happenstance opportunity in London at Digital Illusions. So it was that's kind of a funny story too. Like I made it was a World War II plane, just a Spitfire, and I headed up on a site called
Nice.
3D Lover back in the day, and it wasn't a game asset by any means. And I was very active in the CG Talk community, which was like a big digital art resource back in the day. It was much smaller than it is now. I think there's only around 10,000 members when I was on there, and that's where I met a lot of my early contacts. But somebody posted and said, "Hey, they're looking for website space." I said, "Oh, check out 3D Lover. That's where I got my stuff hosted." So they went to it and they're like, "Hey, did you make that plane to apply at Digital Illusions?" I was like, "No, where's digital? Like, what is this? Who are you guys? What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, check it out." So he sent me a link or told his art director to take a look at it or something like that. And he said, "Yeah, we're in London and we're the makers of Battlefield 1942." So I'm like, "Okay, well, let's check out Battlefield 1942." And I played the demo. I was like, "This game's incredible! Like,
Yeah.
this is like I was playing the Wake Island demo of 1942, and I jumped in a Jeep and I looked beside me, and the dude's just like going like this while I'm driving. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever, right?
Yep.
So I was like, "You guys are in London and you made this?" And they're like, "Yeah, totally." So I think I got sent an art test like within a day or two, and they're like, "Here, you got a week to make this thing." So I sent it back in like, I don't know, 20 hours or something like that. I was just like, "Here you go." They're like, "When can you come in for an interview?" I said, "You're an hour away. Give me an hour. I'll be there." So I popped down literally within 2 days. I think that was a Friday. And we had the interview. And he called me after and he said, when, we'd like to make you an offer. When can you start? I said, "Monday." Like, let's
Yeah,
go.
let's go. Yeah, let's get it started.
So yeah, it was like, it was super fast. And now, hey, I'm driving to London and working in games at Digital Illusions. And it was awesome. So that was my first step into like the actual video game space. Right. So, and then, yeah, I came on as a junior artist knowing nothing about how to make actual like low poly game assets. I remember I had to redo, and the art director must have been losing his mind at the time, but I had to redo like the M16 gun probably like 5 times because it was just, I was trying to make like the high res version. That's not going to work in the game engine. So I was like tuning it, learning techniques.
Well, because you're looking at what, PS2 era?
Yeah, so that was Battlefield Vietnam. That was out for PC. We launched it in 2003 or four. So yeah, that would have been PS2, right?
Yeah, your PS2, original Xbox era. Like if you're trying to get these high res assets, probably not going to work at the time.
Oh yeah,
about 10 years too soon.
The version of Go ahead, Scott.
About 10 years too soon.
Yeah. So I was just really learning the ropes there, and by the end of the project, though, I was I guess my title became like I was lead weapon artist, but also I became the sub like art lead. So I was like helping others. So I think maybe it was a combination of like some of the like management skills and stuff like that too, and all that. So I did excel pretty quickly there in terms of my role as an artist on that project, and it was I was I got things streamlined so I could really quickly do these assets, and I was making sure that there were deliverables, they were ahead of time, and all that. That was always the number one thing for me. It's like, when do you need this by? Here, you got it before that. And it's just like I never wanted to miss a mark, so it was always like bang, bang, bang. So yeah, I did that job for about 3 years, and as crazy as it sounds, I kind of got sick of working on Battlefield. And I look back now, I'm like, that's some of the most fun I had in the industry. Like we would just hang out after, and we would just play test the game. We'd be like, flying around doing dogfights till 2 in the morning, and then get up and come back in, right, and work on it some more. And I look back, I'm like, is that because I was young? Was it the game? It's probably a little bit of both, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm new to the industry. This game's super cool, and it was like a lot of just like kind of young ragtag group of like, oh, you never worked in games before too. You never did this, or all very new. So we were just like hanging out together all the time, working on the game together. So it was a really, really cool and fun part of my career. So I did that for 3 years and kind of felt like, okay, well, I've done everything that Battlefield I can do on Battlefield anyway. I was lead vehicles on the Canadian portion of BF2, and we did some other expansion stuff that I was on. Then I moved over to Digital Extremes, and I was a senior technical artist, then became art manager there before I left to start my own thing. So ultimately, I think where it came down to, Scott, was just me wanting to make my own games. Like I really like, as much as I could do art, it became really like, what is the most efficient, streamlined process for me to do the art? It wasn't like I wanted to make the game. I want to design the game, right? So I was looking at that going, well, you know what? I'm art manager. It's like I can't just jump over and be like lead design or anything. I'd have to like kind of start it like, oh, I'd be like a level designer, work my way up. I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do that again because I just did that on the art side. So I'm like, and you know what? I was getting a little burnt out with just how much I was working too. Like we were pushing the game Dark Sector at that time, and that
Yep.
required a lot of extra effort by a lot of people to get that out. And I was just getting to the point where I'm like, this is I've been going hard for a while, and I was honestly contemplating on like, you know what, do I just leave the industry and get into a trade and just kind of make hobby games for fun and really like just enjoy that part of it again, or do I take a crack and see if I can make my own game studio. So I had an idea way back then. That would have been 2007, and I had an idea for a free-to-play like collectible card game that I wanted to do, and that was very new again. Like I knew it was like kind of big in Asia and stuff like that, but it wasn't really a Western adopted practice then. Was the like free-to-play aspect. So that's when I started. I put together a little doc for an idea, and it was kind of like Dota meets a free-to-play card game.
Mm-hmm.
So I was playing a ton of Dota at that time too. So I actually formed together a little prototype, well document and prototype with some a colleague, and then we later went on to found Antic Entertainment. So it was myself, a programmer from Digital Extremes, and then Frederick, which was my boss at Dice. So we formed Antic Entertainment.
Just a hodgepodge, yeah. Just kind of brought the team together.
Well, it was like there was like design, code, and then business, so it like seemed like the perfect Triforce, right? So we then tried to really build out Antic Entertainment, and we lasted for about 5 years or so. We didn't really get any notable success by any means, but I learned a lot about just like the business side of games, right? Like I learned the process of and the organizations. I learned of Interactive Ontario. I learned of Ontario Creates, which was OMDC at the time. I learned about the grant proposals, how you put those together, all the tax credits. So I was just like, while we didn't really achieve much success in those 5 years, I learned all what you can and can't do and shouldn't do and what you should do.
You leveled up as a person.
100%.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that time too, is like, as a founder, it's like I didn't take any salary. I was just like my line of credits going like blah 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 blah. So I'm like, just from a personal level, learning how to really be efficient with my spending. So it's like, and I've always been like had a mindset for that stuff. Like I'd buy good deals for video games and then sell them for more. So during that time, it was really like an exercise of, how can I sustain this no income, trying to live my dream making games thing, right? So I learned a lot just about how to live efficiently with that too. And so yeah, that ultimately came to an end. It was just, again, burnout, and we weren't really seeing success. We were just kind of ready for something new, right? So at that time, I went on a big motorcycle trip with my buddy, and I came back and I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with Antic. So I spoke. It was only myself and Frederick at that time too. So we kind of talked, and we're like, yeah, we were both feeling the same. That's like, hey, it's maybe time we try and do something new. So I took a big 3-month break and just slept and played games. I didn't play any PS3 games up until that point. I had an Xbox 360, so I was like, you know what? We had an PS3 at the company, so I took that and I was like, I'm gonna go get all the top games. So I picked up like 5 games and just binged games and slept for like 3 months and just like kind of recouped because
Recover.
It was just like, oh, totally, yeah. It was a big push there. It was like 5 years of no real paycheck and just working like crazy to try and get this off the ground.
I think yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
I think for like a lot of people, I think there's a like maybe not with the no income, but like I think there's a lot of us kind of have that spot in our lives where it's like you're leveling up much more as a person than you are like always realize that you're moving forward. You know what I mean? Like especially something like that. It's like that 5 years. Sure, you weren't it didn't like really grow you financially, but like mentally, it prepared you for everything that came after and your success that came afterwards. So like I think that can be very undervalued, and that's you. If you didn't have that foundation, things wouldn't be where they are now.
100%.
Two very, very quick things. One with dice. Were you a history buff? Is that why you did the Spitfire? Like, is that something that you enjoyed it, or it was just a model that you enjoyed?
I love how they looked and all that. It's funny you said, "Are you a history buff?" though, because I remember my first experience with the online community en masse.
Yeah,
I was the weapon guy, right? So I made an M60. I was so proud of it. They were dropping screenshots announcing Battlefield Vietnam. Hey, here's the new game. And the first comment I see is like, "Oh, whoever made that M60 or M60 doesn't know what they're doing. Anyone who's ever carried one before would know the handle faces this way and not that way, because when you carry it," and he's going on this whole rant. I'm like, of course I've never carried an M60 before.
Yeah.
But we made that like an actual like active decision because we wanted to be in the camera frame because it was more interesting.
Of course.
So, what was I saying? So yeah, that was kind of my first experience with the online community, right? I think that's where you got it.
Yeah, where people were like, the amount of dedication, like for me, as you said Spitfire, like I've recently been watching like World War II in color. That's like, because I'm getting older, so apparently this is at the time of my life where I started watching World War II documentaries. But it was as you said that I was like, I actually know what that is. I was like, and that's one of the reasons why I'm like interested in some of the older battlefields. Is like I'm interested in that time period itself. So yeah, I was just curious if that was something that you were like into, and that's what got you in, or it was just something that you thought would look cool.
Yeah, no, I liked it, but I was definitely not like I'm gonna research this like crazy. I was like, oh, World War II planes are really cool designs and all that. But yeah, never to the point where it's like I got to research everything about it kind of thing. So
and then you realize that people online are like, whoa. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's funny because that actually plays into something a little later on when we start talking about Tiny Titan. But when I made Tiny Rails, like I had this idea for, oh, it'd be cool to have this little pixel train and all that. What I realized was I had no idea how many people loved trains and were like train enthusiasts.
It's an avid community. Yeah.
Oh, huge. Can you make this train? Can you make this train? We're like, oh my god, I don't know anything about trains. I just thought it'd be cool to see a train go by and be kind of relaxing and all that while it travels the world, right? So that was a really interesting thing.
Yeah, the amount of people like that's people's hobbies. They are like avid fans of like we love video games, and there's people that love their trains and they love history and they're like pour their heart and soul into it, which is fun. It can be a lot of pressure, I'm sure, but like it's also fun to like kind of have that like passion like come back. And then another thing I wanted to ask you quick was what was it like being on the ground floor of what ended up becoming Warframe?
Well, I didn't have any part in Warframe. So
well, like Dark Sector was that like that seed, right? That like kind of kicked it all off in the first place. So I'm just curious of like now when you see like how well Warframe is doing and how well Digital Extreme's doing, being like, hey, I kind of had a little part in that. Like
Yeah. You know what's funny? I remember it was the Christmas party after I left. So it would have been the Christmas party of 2008 Digital Extremes. And maybe it had a part, maybe it didn't. I have no idea. But I remember James and Mike and I think we're sitting on the couch, and we might have had a little bit too much to drink there. But I remember telling James, I'm like, you got to do free to play co-op. Like you got to do free to play. So I'm like, you got to like just look at the business behind. Like you get so many more users. So I don't know if it like had any part in all that, but it'd be cool if it did.
Do you just take full credit for Warframe's success?
That's what I was trying to do. No. But I like because it was emerging everywhere, right?
Yeah,
like,
of course.
Started like I'm like the free to play is the way to go, right? But yeah, it's that's about the only closest contact I had to it. Yeah, Dark Sector was kind of the world that Warframe took in, and it's amazing to see that success because I know those guys were really passionate about that whole theme and everything like that. So to see it come together and to grow on the scale it did, it's like it's amazing to watch, right? So
that was one of the reasons why or we said to Danielle to be on the first episode, because like one, community management is a passion of mine and it's something that like I think a lot of people, especially in the industry, want to learn more about, right? Because that tends to be something where it's like, okay, we're programming, we have our producer, blah blah blah, but communications and community management tends to kind of fall by the wayside, and it'll be like kind of bolted on to somebody else's pre-existing job. So I was hoping to get an expert in, right, and have her kind of go through and be like, okay, if that's kind of your business plan, these are some of the quick hits you can do to try to maximize your efforts. But yeah, that was something that like I like seeing, just the evolution of Warframe and like seeing the No Clip documentary and being like, wow,
that was actually really cool to watch as well. Yeah,
I love No Clip, right? So like seeing that, I was like, that's amazing. So that's when I first heard about them, and then I started working at Interactive Ontario, and then we decided to do the Lodge, and I was like, I want to talk to them. And I was like, because that's just such a cool story, and I love that seeing your resume and stuff and being like, no way, like you were on the
Yeah.
ground floor of that. Like that's very, very cool.
Yeah, it
Um,
was it's like just I remember when I first started at Digital Extremes because a big game for me growing up was called Solar Winds. And most people probably haven't heard of it, but it was a top-down space shooter. And it was made I don't know if it was under it might have been under Digital Extremes label, but I don't remember it at that time. But the short story is that James made it. So I was like a total. I remember like going up to James like one of the first times talking to him, and I was just like fanboy. I was like, "You made Solar with?" And like everyone's used to like Unreal and this, which I played Unreal and all that, and it was
yeah,
awesome. But like Solar Winds for me was just such this like niche, really cool game, and it actually inspired one of my early ideas I wanted to do, which was like a more large scale top down space game like that I called Zen 7 at the time, right? So that was just such a really cool moment for me. It was like he was one of the like early pioneers in this industry, right? Like I was playing all those shareware games back in the day, and you know, some of them were made by him, and that was just such a cool moment for me that I'm like, I can't believe, you know, I'm part of this thing that you know I grew up like really liking some of these games, and now I'm part of this organization. So
some people want
yeah,
to meet LeBron James. Some people want to meet, like they have their heroes, and then we
yeah,
have our heroes. Where it's like, I want to meet Hideo Kojima. I want to meet
yeah.
like,
It's
Corey
totally yeah,
Barlog,
it's
right?
funny.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of like the celebrity stuff doesn't really do much for me. I don't.
No, but it's
Hey,
these
cool. That's
people,
the
it's the
yeah,
creatives that you're like, whoa, like
yeah,
you changed my life. Like,
yeah. I had that one time too. This was probably back in like maybe 2013, 2012 maybe, and I was just huge into a game called Realm of the Mad God at that time too. And I remember meeting the creators at GDC, and I was just so like, oh my god, you guys made this game, and it was just so pumped. And it was like this, yeah. So yeah, there goes you know, Tom Cruise, whatever. It's like you guys made Realm of the Mad God, like that's so cool. And it was just like getting into the mindset of like how they came up with it and stuff like that. Like that's what really like interested me, right?
yeah,
So
you're like
yeah,
just that creative mind, especially because you have that connection at that point, right? Like you've been making games your whole
yeah,
life. So you're like, how difficult a lot of those choices are, and you see a lot more than I think most people would.
hmm,
Right? Like that was something that like I've talked about previously on the podcast about being like it's kind of hard when you go into a game, you're seeing it completely differently than everybody else, which can be good and can be bad because you're
yeah,
seeing flaws that other people wouldn't see, but you're also seeing like how did they do that? Like little tiny like AI things and like other like programming like things that people aren't seeing, and you're like
yeah,
that's a masterpiece. Like how did they manage to pull that off, right? So
yeah,
you have a whole
yeah. You
different
totally have a
appreciation.
different lens. I remember like when I was like very into 3D, it was like well, movies all of a sudden became like oh, okay, I know how they do that and this and that. But I like I'd even be walking around going like you almost see things in wireframe. It's like
Yeah.
oh that's how you'd actually construct these things and all that. And yeah, it is funny how it just kind of puts that
You
veil
just see the
down and you
Matrix and you're
yeah
like,
yeah
yeah,
totally
you see
yeah
behind the
blonde
veil.
brunette redhead
Yeah.
yeah totally yeah.
What was one of the things? So when you went and did your own studio in 2008, why mobile? Like working on these like big console
Sure.
games. I'm just curious of that mindset of being like, what attracted you to it, and then later
Yeah.
we'll get to what unattracted you to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, these are great questions. So 2008, we didn't initially start out mobile. So what we wanted to do, the initial concept, I wanted to do a game for the eShop for the Wii. Like the Xbox Live Arcade, Wii,
Yep.
like eShop. That was kind of what I wanted to do. But then we were also looking at like Frederick and I were particularly focused on like the business side of things going, well, I mean, that's going to cost, you know, at least $500,000 to do. We need some connections
Mm.
there. We'll probably have to have a publisher. And both myself and him were playing this web game at this time called Gladiatus, and it was like a gladiator oriented game where you just you have so many resources, so many fights you can do a day, and then it's like you want to try and win those fights and you put points in stats and get different gear, right? So it's kind of like an asynchronous PvP Diablo-esque game because it's like you could go in the shop, it's like, oh, they got this shield, it's got these stats, I have this much gold, I'll buy it, and then I got my like 5 fights I can do today to see how I do, and I'm progressing up the ladder. So we were playing this game. We're like, oh, you know, hey, Game Forge. We're like, let's look into them. I'm like, holy shit, Game Forge is this German game company, and they got 240 people, and it's from this game. We're like, whoa, there's a
Yeah.
whole like that's huge. Like this game must be making a ton of money. So we're like this. So we started looking into them. Where we're like, this is much more doable for us at our site because we only had 3 people at that time, right? So we're like, this is much more doable at this time. So we're like, how do we take the idea we had and make a web-based version of that game, right? Because we thought it was just a more accessible point to get into rather than,
For sure.
hey, we're going to make a prototype and then try and pitch it for publishers. So that's how we started, and then we launched our first game called Junk Wars, which was kind of like you build your own like post-apocalyptic vehicle and then battle other people. And I mean, we didn't like one of the major lessons I learned during Antic was know when to pull the cord. Like we
Fair.
just kept going, oh, this feature will get it there. Oh, this feature will get it there. And by the end, like we threw the kitchen sink at the games we were doing there. It's like we should have like the core of the game was not where it needed to be, and we should have abandoned this thing a while ago or focused on the core. But instead, we were adding like real-time auction houses and quest modding and upgrading your part, like just whatever system we could come up with. We're
Yeah.
like, we'll throw that in. Like it was actually like a web-based live PvP real-time game with like full marketplace. Like it was dumb. It was like way too much overkill. But it was that like, oh, it's making a little bit of money. This will get it to here where we need to be. And it was like we kept chasing that thing instead of going, you know what? It's taking a good look and going, it's not working. We gotta do something about that. So that was one of the big lessons I learned during Antic is just like know when to cut because you're throwing good money after bad, and time is more important, right? You're throwing good time after bad time. So, pivot, try something new. And if you don't really get, and there's definitely cases where it's like games picked up over time, but more often than not, if you don't get that initial traction, it's probably dead in the water, right? So that was one of the things going forward where I'm like, you know what, we just got to be honest with ourselves here, and if this isn't really landing, let's try something.
Which I'm sure is a very difficult call to make because it's something that if you put that much time and effort into it, it's from you, right? It's like it's your creative baby, like it's something that you're clearly attached to on a day-to-day basis. So being like cutting the cord would be, I imagine, be very difficult.
It is. You know what? It's that reminds me of another story. I'm just full of stories, Scott. But I mean,
it's a
early on,
podcast, man.
that's what this is about. Perfect. Early on, I did really kind of develop that kill your babies mentality.
Yeah.
I remember it was back when I was making the M16s at Dice, and I remember, I was working on an M16. I'm like, yeah, I feel good about this. So I messaged the art director. I'm like, hey, can you take a look at this? And he was sitting maybe 10 feet to my right, and he just, slides over in his chair, and he looks at it for, a minute, just clicking around. And then he turns to me, goes, looks like shit, and then slides back to his chair, and I'm just like, okay. And then he shot me a message. He's like, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this. So I go through it, and I'm like, looks better. I'm like, that it worked. So I quickly developed this, like, okay, look, don't get attached to it. Like that feedback was good feedback. And I mean, just my general personality, I like to just tell me straight.
Yeah,
don't fill with fluff. Hit me at the point.
Yeah.
I don't like. You're not going to hurt my feelings.
We don't have time. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause go. Right. So it's like, just tell me. So I did develop that early on. So one of, I think, our greatest strengths is that we can pivot, and it sucks, but it's like pivot and move on, right? But don't get caught up in it, and don't get drowned by it. And oh no, it could have been this. Yeah, it could have been that, but it wasn't. So time to go forward, right? That's been one of our greatest strengths. Yeah, totally. So yeah.
One of the things I definitely had to ask you about right before we get into Tiny Titan, and of course we're going to talk about Ember Knights because I played that combat demo many a times. Mana Lounge. Lounge. How do you pronounce it?
Mana Lounge.
Okay.
Mana like the magic. Yeah.
I have a friend that pronounces Super Smash Bros. Melee.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Like, I will never not make fun of him for that, but like it's just Vase Voss is one of those things. So this is an upper end Magic the Gathering boutique. So this is one of your, I'm sure this has been one of your goals for a while. So I'm curious to hear a little bit kind of how that came to be, and unfortunately the obvious question of the pandemic and how it's been for you.
Sure. So Scott, you're gonna find a theme. I liked it wasn't a dream for a while. I love playing Magic the Gathering. And after one of our big games that kind of flopped at Tiny Titan Arena Stars, I was kind of like, what should we do next kind of thing. And the same buddy who got me into Diablo got me back into Magic at that time. And I've been in and out of Magic a lot. And there was a point around 2010 that I was playing pretty competitively, and I was going to like tournaments and stuff like that. So he got me back. He's like, come on out for a pre-release. We went and did, I think it was like M20 Core. And so I got back into it. I'm like, oh man, this game is so good. Like I love Magic the Gathering, right? So I got back into it, playing it. Then I was just like, looking up card values. I'm like, and then I just see what my collection I sold for cheap is now worth. I'm like, why did I sell all my cards?
Yeah.
It was worth like 3 or 4 times as much, right? So then it actually started with, and I was playing and I was enjoying it again, and I was spending too much money on Magic, and then I ended up taking, it was just a Saturday, and I was taking my little kid back to my hometown to just visit the grave of my pops and just take them on tour kind of thing. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna stop at my childhood card store and I'll take them in there. I'm like, that'll be really cool. And then I went in there and they had boxes and boxes of old Magic stuff. Like from their oldest one was Magic 2012, and that's when I last got out of
Whoa.
it. Was like Core 2012, and this is in 2019. I started this, and they're selling it for like 110 bucks or something for the box. I'm like, that seems cheap. So I'm like, I check eBay. I'm like, they're selling for 220. I was like, okay.
Yeah, there's
So I'm like,
that trigger. Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
was like, I came out of there with the back of the truck filled with cases of Magic the Gathering. I spent way too much money. It was something like 10 grand or something like that. And I was like, oh, buy all these, buy all these, buy all these. And then I got home and I just had these like cases of Magic sitting on my table at home. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, if I can get these for wholesale price,
Yeah.
that's an even better deal, right? So I was sitting at I was sitting at Tiny Titan and we were trying to we were like working on some prototypes and I was just like looking into things. I'm like, I wonder what it would take to get like distribution stuff. So I started looking into it. It's like, hey, you need a business license and you need a lease. It's like, I got those things.
Doable. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, I got these. So I'm like, hey, I'm gonna submit an application that Tiny Titan Studios is looking to get wholesale distribution hookups from the two Magic dealers in Canada. So they come back, they're like, "Hey, no problem. Just send us a picture of your storefront and your retail spot." I said, "Okay, all right. You can play this game." So I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay." So I quickly like over into Photoshop. I'm like, I put together a logo, and then I'm like, I sent it to my art director. I'm like, "Hey, can you touch this up a little bit?" So he did some nice just color improvements on it. And I was like, "Okay." I went and got it printed on a big banner. And then we had in the back of the office, we had like a pool table area that no one used. So I'm like,
Mhm.
let's get that out of here. I'm like, I went to Toronto, picked up a display case, and then I put the banner up, took a photo of the front. I said, okay, here's where the retail will be. Obviously, I don't have any product yet. That's why I'm trying to talk to you. But here's the plan, and here's what we want to do. So they're like, okay, yeah, that sounds legit. So I was like, okay, here we go. So now I'm like, I start ordering some Magic, and then I'm looking into on Wizards, going, hey, what do I need to actually have events? I'm like,
Yeah.
this could be cool to run events because I didn't want to play in like dingy basements anymore. Like I'm too old for that kind of stuff, and that's
Yeah.
usually what Magic was for me. So I'm like,
It's played
we
out.
got yeah, totally. So I'm like, we got some space up here. I'm like, I wonder if I can make a run and actually do some events. So I talk to Wizards and they're like, yeah, hey, just send us a video walkthrough of your store. I was like, oh,
Here we
okay. Now
go. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm getting signs up out on the front door now because like our building was, you had to buzz to get in, walk up 3 flights of stairs, and then the door is auto locked. Like it's like the least conducive way to have a
Yeah.
retail store. So, but like once you're in the space, it was nice. So I put up all the signage I could and all that, and they gave me WPN access. So we're part of the Wizards Play Network now. So this all happened inside like a week and a half or something like that. So I went
Whoa.
from like spending too much money on Magic to like I now have a store, and it's like we did a launch party for it, and we had like 45, 50 people up there checking it out. And within a couple months, we had the biggest tournament in town. We had like 50 people out for the pre-release for it, and we put on a great show, and people loved it. So that it was just totally like a Friday night, Saturday thing because it was in our office, right? So we had to do it after people left.
Of course.
So it really materialized super quickly. And then during the pandemic, like again, kind of with the business mindset, and like I'm looking at the rent and all that we were paying for
Mhm.
just the game dev stuff. I'm like, this is a ton of money, and I'm like, I asked the landlord if he was interested in selling the building like a while ago because I'm like, I'd rather just own it than pay rent and figure out the logistics of how that could work. But then an opportunity came up a few buildings down. It was a hobby store, but upstairs there was two. It was a 3-story building, right? So it was
Oh.
already a hobby store, and he was kind of looking to get out. So we got talking, and we came to a deal for me to actually buy that building. And I was like, well, we're going to turn Mana Lounge into a full retail store now. So and then make the game dev on floors 2 and 3. So that happened April of last year, and we renoed the entire building. So what you see now is like we're on the 3rd floor of that building. So floors 2 and 3 are our game dev operations. It's fully renoed, looks great, and then floor 1 is a full game and hobby store. Yeah, done from the ground up. We have an amazing playroom. it's not just Magic the Gathering too. We do Warhammer, we do board games, we do D&D, other TCG games, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Flesh and Blood, stuff like that. But our main, like our bread and butter is Magic the Gathering. So
You've
because that
built
is
your
like the big
castle.
passion. Yeah, so it's like this place is like the ultimate man cave now, right? Because it's like, being game devs, it's like, okay, we're up here working, and then we go down and play a tournament or something, or hey, I'm gonna go grab a pack or whatever. So it's
Wow.
yeah, and in the back of the building too, we actually just finished our gym. So we got a gym that's accessible for employees of both companies. They can freely use it and all that. So yeah, it's a pretty cool little fortress.
Wow, that turned out well. And that
Yeah,
all that came from going into your own childhood store. Just
yeah,
being like, hey, I'm gonna spend far too much money on cards, and then look where it is
yes.
now.
hmm
And things you guys are
So
doing, I assume, pretty well at this point. Like things are starting to open back up a little bit, and like I assume like you're gonna be able to hopefully start doing some more tournaments and events
So we've
in the
been able
near
to
future.
do off and on tournaments. Like it depends
Yeah.
on the level of lockdown, right? It's don't get me wrong, these lockdowns they were crazy for small business, especially ones that require
Hmm.
people to be out. Because it was like a stutter thing too. It's like, okay, hey, you can be open for a bit. Oh, back down. Okay, let's grow it again. Oh, back down. Okay, one more. Okay, back down. It's like this is like how many false starts can you do here, right? So and something where it requires other people to play, it was really challenging. Thankfully, like Magic the Gathering is a pretty I don't want to say well, it is addictive, but it's got a strong foothold online as well, and people
Oh
like
yeah,
collecting and all that. So
yeah.
we were able to carry through through the challenges of hey, you can't have people playing in your store and stuff like that. So hopefully, like, well, we are coming out of that now, so hopefully it just starts like building up from that again. But no, I'd say like we've done okay, but it's certainly we're in survival mode to be like, hey, let's just make sure that we can keep things going and all that, right? But when we can actually play again, because when people come out to play, they're of course buying more, right? So that's where we really want to be. And just me from like my passion towards it, it's like I love hosting. I want to have people out having a cool
Yeah.
tournament, having a great day out of it. Like that's what I really enjoy. Like it's very much a passion project for me, and less so like what are the hard numbers. It's like as long as we're not losing money, I don't really care. I just want to make a really cool experience for people to come into that kind of inspires like, hey, when I went into these places when I was young, like make that kind of experience for new people coming in and all that. So
It's your way
yeah,
of giving
that's
back
kind
and
of
inspiring.
yeah, 100%, right? And just getting those communities together. It's like whether it's a digital community and the other games I make, or an in-person community for the Magic stuff or D&D. That's what I really enjoy doing. Like I love the social side of those things. So that was really like one of the core things about this is like make the ultimate play space first,
And you have
and
like
then
such a unique like you're in such a unique area. Like the longer I've been in the industry, the more and more I've seen of like where you are right now is like a huge mecca in Ontario for like there's so many studios and there's so much talent and like you
yeah,
have your audience right outside your front door kind of thing. Like you have the
yeah.
people that want to come and are into those communities and like are passionate and like enthralled and they have their friends who have their friends, right? And it like especially having
That's
those
it.
in-person
It's
things is
very
huge.
oriented in like, hey, bringing a friend, bringing a friend, bringing a friend. Totally right. But yeah, it's funny you say that because I think London, and I heard this figure maybe about 2 years ago. I'm sure it's still true, but London has the highest per capita game developer ratio in Canada, which is pretty cool. It's like 1 in 900 people is a game developer, right? Like with Digital Extremes, Big Blue Bubble, Big Viking. I think we were fourth biggest, and then there's a bunch of indie guys and all that too. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's such an interesting area. And like I think that's three, if not four, of our six guests are in London, or most recently
Yeah,
worked in London, which is crazy. Like that was never
yeah,
planned. And then you
yeah.
just see it and you're like, wow, like these studios and these people that I think can give a lot back to the community, right? Which is why we bring in people with, a variety of expertise. And it's like, I can't believe I just keep London, London, London. I'm like, this is not planned. Like I hope they know that.
Yeah,
I'm in Ottawa, so it's not like I'm biased. But
it's super weird because it's like I remember when I was working at Digital Illusions, it was like in the tower next door. There's two towers. We're making Battlefield, they're making Unreal. Digital Illusions, Digital Extremes, and nobody talked to each other. I'm like, how do you guys not like hang out and all
yeah,
that
these are
stuff?
your
But I think
people. Like,
yeah, but I don't know if it was like there's a little bit of this competitiveness or maybe a little bit of the
yeah,
introversion or whatever it was. But
yeah, that's
I was
also
like,
fair.
this is so cool. But it's like one was started by James and he got the Unreal path. The other was started by Frederick and some colleagues and they did the Battlefield path. And now here you guys are in London, Ontario, literally maybe 1,000 feet apart, and we're not like how are we not hanging out more and doing cool stuff, right? Like these are two amazing huge games in this space. And yeah, it always blew my mind that it's like they kind of congregated here in London, Ontario.
It's fun to see the walls kind of go down too, right? Because like I think
Yeah.
that's not as prevalent as much anymore. There's of course that sense of competition, but it's also
Yeah.
like if you succeed, we succeed. If we succeed, you succeed. Like it's much more of
Yeah.
that like community vibe, which I think is what
I've
the
always
industry
been
needs.
Yeah, I've always been for that kind of stuff. Even like,
Yeah.
talking about my ideas, like I'm not secret. I'd rather talk about my ideas and hear some feedback than be like, oh, I can't share anything,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've always been more open with that stuff, probably I'd say than most. But yeah,
Which I think will benefit you more than it'll hurt you. It's like to get that feedback and be like, oh yeah, because the people around you, of course, are going to say a certain thing. So when you have these conversations
yeah,
with these other professionals, you're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. They may have an area of expertise that you aren't familiar with, and it's like
totally.
it's
And
always
nobody's
good.
taking
Yeah.
your exact idea and running and making it because they don't know everything about it. And like, there's so much nuance in how you execute it anyway that, yeah,
Yeah, it's not going to be a carbon copy by any means of the
no,
imagination.
no.
So Tiny Titans,
Mm-hmm. We got there.
we got there. We had to get there because Ember Knights is definitely something I want to touch on. I just want to also touch on just the beginning of Tiny Titans. Where did it come from? Why? Obviously, a lot of it was mobile, and then we'll talk about the exit and the not so mobile.
Yeah, cool. So Tiny Titan Origin, yeah, I'd say it was probably about the 3 months after Antic kind of wound down, where I was like playing games, just feeling kind of like I think I was probably 31, 32 at that time, which is always an interesting age too, because I think that's when you start to become more introspective and kind of accept where you are, who you are, and all that stuff, right? Your 20s, oh, what am I? You're trying to figure stuff out, and I found in my early 30s, it's like, okay, no, this is who I am, and this is kind of like what I think and where I want to go and all that. So it was one of those points where I'm like, you know what? I just wasn't ultimately I'm like, there's a long road to go yet, and I got to find something that I want to do here. So I started getting into fitness at that time too, and I'm like, okay, I got to change my mindset. I got to start going to the gym again, and so I got into yoga big time. Started
Huge.
weightlifting big
Helps
time,
helps a
running.
lot.
Oh, totally.
I
Yeah.
love
I
yoga.
got into the best shape of my life. Absolutely. And I was like, it just hit a point where it's like, I want to build stuff again. I want to create some stuff again. So I was looking at options. I started making like just these little cool 3D models. I thought I was like, I'll throw them on the Unity asset store. Maybe I can start to get some revenue coming in. I'm like, even if it's like $500 a month, $50 a month, whatever it is, it's like that's better
It's
than
still
nothing.
yeah.
Just something coming in, right? So I was looking at some of the old assets I made. I was like, I'll dump them on the Unity store. And one of the assets was this space turret that had two cannons on it. I was like, oh, that'd be really cool if I learned how to like I could move the mouse around the screen and it would like track it, and then I
Yeah.
click and it's like, thinking kind of like the artist. I'm like, that'd be really cool just to see that and the effects. Like that'd be cool to do. That is shooting where I want to do. So I learned how to do that. Then I'm like, it'd be cool if you actually shot stuff. Then you get points for it. So then I was like, okay, all right. I'm gonna look up some Unity tutorials and see, hey, how can I make a game? So that little tutorial on how to set that up basically turned into our first game, which was Starship Turret Operator Guy. So I like the idea of like, no, you're not the hero. You're just like this kind of Al Bundy of a starship. You're just
Yeah, I
you
love
you got
that.
these guns on the one side of the thing, and all you gotta do is stop junk from hitting your ship. So I thought that was kind of a cool idea. I was like, well, you know what? What's the most accessible way for me to get a game out there? I'm like, I don't know. Like I was always around a little bit of code. I would try and code on my own a little bit, but I never made a game from start to finish. Like I did a little bit of Flash stuff and all that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to make a game from start to finish. And so I put together that game called Starship Turret Operator Guy, and I was like, I'm going to try two versions. I'm going to do a paid one for $2,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to do a free to play version that just basically like a shareware drives them to the paid one, and we'll see how that does. So I launched the paid one, and I think the first day it made like $8, and then the next day it made like $14, and then it was like $21. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
here we go. And then the next day it was like $15. I'm like, oh no! And then it was like $9. I'm like, that was my peak. I was like, oh no, terrible.
I'm ruined.
I gotta find something else now. So then I released the free to play version,
Mm-hmm.
and I just had a little bit of ads in there, but I'm like, it got way more downloads, like way more downloads. I was getting like a couple hundred downloads a day as opposed to 5. And I saw some of the ad revenue. I was like, oh well, it made like in the first month or something, maybe it made like $1,000 or something off ads, where the paid one made a total of I don't know, maybe $100. So I'm like, okay, well, I got another game in the works, and it was funny because It was just I had some friends over, and they wanted to see how to code in Unity. So I was like, well, here, let's put together a quick little game idea. So
What a nerdy group of friends.
yeah, right. I know it's our people. It's okay.
I have some friends
so
over
I made this
code.
yeah, let's make games. So I had this little blue cube, and I was like, here, I had him moving around in a space. I'm like, here's how you'd set up a controller to move him. I'm like, I'm just gonna have some logs come from the left and the right side, and you just got to jump them, just avoid them, don't die. You get hit, you die. So we put that together in a few hours. Then we were playing, and we're like, hey, we're calling our girlfriends down. We're like, what's your score? What can you do on this, right? Because they were not interested in what we're doing, and they're doing, it, and they're like, okay, let me try once more. I was like, this is actually kind of fun. I was like, okay, let me see if I can beat you. They were like, shit, should we make this game? So then he was an artist, so he put together this really nice looking blue cube with character to it, and we called it Happy Cube Death Arena. And it was a very simple.
Dude.
All you do is you just sit in the middle, and all you can do is jump, double jump, and then you can press jump again while you're in the air to slam down. And it starts with spikes rolling, and then more things came at you and all you're doing is like hop, 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 hop. And so we put together this game, and I was like, okay, I tried the paid and then the free. I'm going to try freed and then paid now from like a business point of view and see what works better. So we released a free one, and I wasn't figuring out how to even get something on the Apple device at that time. By me was an insane challenge in its own thing. I was not into the metric side of thing. I didn't have analytics hooked up or anything. And I remember getting a tweet. I'm barely on Twitter, but I made an account just because. And I got a tweet from my friend. He's like, dude, your game got featured by Apple. I'm like, what? So I'm like, I have no way to see what that even means. I'm like, oh, cool, it's in the store. Like, how many downloads am I getting? Because the metrics were all delayed at that time. They weren't as real time. But I logged into the ad site because they would actually have more real time metrics. Going,
oh, okay, that makes sense.
What you made. So it was like, oh my god, like we made a couple $100 today on ads for it, and it like that grew to a peak of like, I think the peak it made like $1,500 a day while it was being featured just in ads. And I only had one ad, and it was probably my own ignorance, but every fourth time you would die, it would pop one right here, and it'd be like, check out this game. But it was, I didn't know how to like queue it up properly, so it would go right as they're about to hit play again, so they'd accidentally click the ad.
Oh my god.
Which was like, and so we had no good monetization. It was literally like watch a video once, you unlock this whole new cube, and we had 2 of those in the game period. So there's no good fundamentals on how to monetize this properly. But by sheer volume, it actually generated revenue. So right away, the business side of me goes, oh my god, $1,500 a day. Let's extrapolate this out in Excel. I'm like, oh wow, that's like, $3 million a year. I was like, okay, we can do this. And then all of a sudden, it dropped right off. I was like, it still made enough to be like, okay, there's actually something here now, right? Because that game took us 2 months to do, and it did okay for itself during the 2 weeks or whatever while it was featured. So it's like, okay, if I can make a game now that's 3 times as long as that, people play it 3 times, I'll make 3 times the money. It's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, it's simple.
So it's like, okay, yeah. So I'm like, okay, what type of game would I want to play longer? And I mean, being a huge Zelda nerd, you can see actually right there, I got one there, but I'm a huge Nintendo fanboy. I love collecting all that stuff, right? So I'm like, I love Link to the Past. I'm like, what's something like that on mobile? So it's like, okay, so I put together a very quick prototype, and I called it Super Hack or Slash at that time. So left tap was like an axe, and right tap was a sword. And swords would get rid of one thing, axes would get rid of the other. So it's kind of like this rhythm thing, and things would come faster and faster. So I'm like trying to keep it really simple, right? And then I was like, oh, it'd be cool if you could upgrade your weapon. Oh, it'd be cool if you could get armor. It'd be cool if you could get spell. So all of a sudden, I built out this game, which turned into Dash Quest. And I remember putting together, and I'd have people come over and playing it, giving me feedback. And I remember like I'd be working on it, and all during this time, I was like, my health comes first. So I was still like very much into the fitness. I'm like, I'd get up, make a whole breakfast, go work out, make a whole like proper lunch, no fast food, none of that, and then I'd usually just have a nap. Whenever I woke up, I'd start to work after that. So it's very like lifestyle first, which I loved. And then I'd sometimes work till midnight or whatever, right? Sometimes I'd only work an hour or two, then go for a bike ride. Like it was like, this is secondary.
What comes first?
Yes. So I remember though, like some nights I would work on that, I go, okay, I'm going to test it. I'd be laying in bed at night going, okay, I'm going to test this. And I found myself just going, okay, one more run. I can go a little.
Which is that magic sauce, right? Like that's what you
totally.
want.
Because I'm like, another 500 gold, I can buy the better sword. And
yeah,
then
exactly.
How far can I go?
Yeah.
So I started getting some friends to play it and all that, and they're like, yeah, this is pretty cool. So yeah, ultimately was working on that, and I remember talking to my friend, just asking him if he like knew anyone at Apple or whatever, because we got featured but didn't really know anyone. He said, well, he knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, so he shot him an email. I put together a trailer for the game, and I don't know if that came from it or me posting the trailer because I posted in a couple Facebook groups. But crazy enough, on my birthday, September 25th, I got an email. It said "Hello from Apple," and I was like, and for an indie developer,
Yeah.
that's a Willy Wonka golden like you don't have contacts with these people generally, or you didn't at that time. Like this is the same with like all the major platforms, Valve,
Hmm.
Google, Nintendo. So it's like Hello from Apple. It's like I saw the trailer for Dash Quest. It looks really cool. I'd love to chat with you and learn more about Tiny Tiny Studios and Dash Quest. So I was like, absolutely. So I talked with them, and the game got featured. And in the that first week, it made six figures, and the Saturday alone made more than Happy Cube did in its lifetime. And I was just like, I remember waking up just going, "Oh, okay,
This is it. Yeah.
this is it." I'm like, "Okay, this is going now. Like, we can actually do something with this." So, right around that same time too, I had a contact from Trios, um, and they asked me back in the summer if I needed interns. I was like, "No, I don't need any interns." They reached out again at that time and said, "Hey, if you take interns, we got some office space you can just use for free." I was like,
Wow.
okay, that sounds great. So, because I was very much used to not making any money from
Hmm.
like Antic Entertainment and all that. So I was very mindful of everything. I'm like, I'm not wasting any of this because to me now that money translated to runway. This means we can make this many games to give us a better chance to make one that really knocks it out of the park. So I was very mindful of all that. So I was like, yeah, deal. We can take some interns and teach them some things, and we'll get it was like 600 square feet or something small, but I'm like, we have a spot we can actually work out. I can now hire somebody to actually make some more assets to do updates to these games. So yeah, we went into Trios College. We worked on some other games. We released another one called Tapsmith. That came out. It got featured. It did very well. And then we started working on a prototype for what became Tiny Rails, and we also applied to Ontario Creates at that time for a
Hmm.
bigger project, and we found out we got the funding, so we're like, okay, we're in a good spot here. Let's move. That's when we moved to our old location before moving here, and we worked on Tiny Rails. We released Tiny Rails. It got featured right next to Super Mario Run, which was super cool for me being a Nintendo
Yep.
fanboy. And we got over 1 million downloads in the first week on Tiny Rails, and that just became our game that sort of carried us through. So we released a few games after that: Dash Quest Heroes, Dash Quest. I think we called it officially Dash Quest 2, Kung Fu Z, and then we tried a big swing at the fence. So we took a shot on like we're like, okay, you know what? We got our footing here. We got a revenue stream. So we're still like all in the mobile stuff. Like it
Yeah.
again, it didn't really intend to be like I'm going to make mobile games. It was like this is accessible, and we found some success there, so we wanted to keep developing for it. So we're like, okay, let's take a swing at the fence here. We're playing a ton of Clash Royale. We were seeing the numbers that these games were making. We're like, we're in a good enough spot. Let's make a run for it. So we're like, what type of game could do this? So we started working on a real time MOBA style fighting game. It was called. You can check out the trailer. It's called Arena Stars, and we put a lot of effort into it, a lot of production value, and unfortunately, like when we went to release it, just the app store changed, like their layout entirely. A lot of people were seeing drops in numbers, and it was a game that required a lot of users because it was a PvP game, right? A
Hmm.
real time PvP game, which maybe there's some design considerations we should have done. Maybe it shouldn't have been real time, but that requires users, and if you don't have that influx of initial users, it's really hard to get traction for the
Yeah.
game,
That makes sense.
and we didn't have experience really being able to grow user acquisition stuff in the past. So we just found ourselves in a spot where it's like it's not the same landscape it used to be, right? And that's right at the point where I'm like, you know what, like why why are we making mobile games, especially if it's like there isn't, because on the previous releases too, they like we're seeing less and less. Even when we get featured, it was like less and less return on
Hmm.
that. Like, so I was like, that was kind of the seal of the deal for me. And we were working on a real time kart racing game at that time for mobile too, which was it had a pretty cool prototype. But I was like, you know what? Again, this is kind of, hey, cut it. I was
Yeah.
like, I don't even like we don't even really play these games. Like we'll play Clash Royale when we're on a bus waiting for something, but we go home and we play console games
Yeah.
or play retro games or play whatever PC games, right? So I was like, why are we making these? Especially if there's no like it's
Real big payoff. Yeah, like
yeah. So it was one of those things where it's like, let's take a hard look at this and go, okay, you know what? We're gonna pivot away from mobile. Because if a game's going to fail, I'd rather a game fails that it's a game I 100% want to play and make, right? So I'm like, I'm going to make the games I always want to make. I always want to, make games where you have one of these in your hand, right? Where it's like
mhm.
you're playing like this. So I was like, okay, what are we going to work on? So we started working on a game that was like an open world 16-bit Diablo style game. And we're like, oh my God, this game's gonna like it's huge in scope. And like, is that the best thing to do for our first foray
Yeah, I don't
into?
want to overstretch
Even though like
yourself.
I've got experience with this. Some of our other team members have experience with console and PC, but I'm like, as a team, we don't. So I'm like, how do we boil that down into its most simplistic form? It's like, well, let's make a great combat game. Let's make, you know, how can we get a good enough or an in-depth enough title out there that helps us get our footing. So we're like, that's when we started looking at well, let's make it a roguelike because you get good value on your assets you make because people replay them and replay them and replay them. And it really comes from the stem of the core of the design where it's like, okay, I got this little modification now, it plays a little differently. So that's when we started looking at what has become Ember Knight. So during that time, we're still maintaining the mobile titles. We did set them up in a way where they could be kind of maintenance free because it would look like, hey, a new update, but we already pre-queued them all up and they just rotate through. So it's like they look
Gotcha.
like they're live even without us supporting them. So during that time, we're like, maybe we should offload these, right? So um, my brother's in charge of all the biz dev stuff here. So he was actually looking to find a suitor for them, right? So we were shopping around. He was talking to many people about it, and we finally found a potential suitor that was like, yeah, we're interested in the mobile games. It was a fair enough valuation for us that we're like, you know what, this makes sense. Let's kind of shed the past. We'll have a lump sum of money that we can use to develop in the future, like for the games we're doing now, and focus 100% on that. So that deal came together in December. It was in the works for a while, but it closed at the end of December there. So it allowed us to basically go, you know what, let's really just we're all in on Ember Knights kind of thing. This is the game we're making, and this is the type of games we make as a studio going forward. So we're in the middle of that, like not in the middle, but we really got to get that name and that new brand image of the new company. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's really Ember Knights will be our flagship title.
Essentially, you were able to keep that. Obviously, that was like a key thing when you were looking for potential
Oh yeah,
suitors. That
yeah,
like Ember Knights was always the focus of like this is ours, and then it's kind of to offload like the mobile division. Were
yes,
you so right now you're saying like with Ember Knights obviously being the flagship, that is the move going forward. Like you're looking like let's make games that we want to play. Like so you
exactly,
have that
100%.
mentality. So no more
Yeah,
mobile or like not no more mobile. We don't want to say that, but like that's no longer the focus of whatever this next studio will be.
100%. Yeah, we're console PC. I never want to say it's like we'll never do games like this. We'll never do
Yeah,
games
exactly. That's what I
like
mean.
this.
Never say never. You
Yeah.
never like
No, because you don't know what we're gonna who has what idea for what and we want to pursue that path or whatever, right? So I never like to cut that off, but for the time being, it's nice to focus on I'm playing with a controller. It's a one price purchase up front. We can focus
mhm.
on what's fun. What we found during like mobile development, free to play mobile development in particular, is like, oh, like it's everything's metric driven. Oh, our day three retention's dropping. What can we do to increase that? Oh, our
Yeah.
revenue over here isn't as good. Maybe we put an ad here. It's like, how about is that fun? No, make it more fun. How do we inject more fun? So it's really nice for a change to be like that is our primary focus. How do we maximize the fun in this and forget about all that other stuff? So
Yeah, it's not
yeah,
that
no, we're
immediate turnaround. You're like really able to like be in the trenches and like
yeah, and right away
focus.
we saw improvements in the team's energy and excitement towards the products because it's like
Yeah.
this is the stuff they want to play, they want to make as well. So yeah, it's been really refreshing that shift. So we're gearing up for early access launch in early April. It's looking like right now, and yeah,
Nice.
hopefully people enjoy it. We certainly enjoy it, and yeah,
That was
should be
actually
good.
one of the questions I was going to ask was just the morale for the team, like being able to kind of make that shift. And I was, yeah, going to ask exactly that and be like, I wonder how the morale kind of changed when they went from focusing on these smaller indie or smaller mobile titles to this much bigger, much more I don't want to say creative, because obviously you don't want to take away from any of the mobile aspects of things, but I feel like it's just much more like collaborative, being able to have this team. Also, pixel art is just timeless. So like I think it's the look and feel of it, I think, is like on point, and like that, and like you see it. I remember like the first time you and me talked that we were going through stuff with the Lodge, because you were actually an integral part of the Lodge in the first place. So thank you for giving me this show. But that was one thing that like we were talking more about business things, and I was like, oh, by the way, I played the combat demo for Ember Knights, and you just lit up. And it's like having that kind of pride. You don't always get that, especially when you're talking to the, like, higher ups at certain companies. Like it's not necessarily just business first, but it doesn't have that like spark of passion. But like you lit up. If you light up, your team lights up, right? And it's like I like to see that I could kind of say that offhandedly, and you were like, oh shit, really? I was like, yeah man, like let's talk about it. Let's get into it.
That's what's always motivated me, Scott, is like that joy when somebody's playing with it. And like it's I I grew up and I'm like, Zelda is my best game ever. And I remember the favorite game ever. I remember reading some early comments, and you'd see some things where it's like, this is the best game ever. And you have to remember that, like, because you get that imposter syndrome and all that stuff. But at that time, in that moment, to that person, that inspired them, that gave them joy, and that to them was the best game ever. And I look at it going, Dash Quest? Like, no way. But it's so cool that you can get a snapshot of that impact on people's lives, right? So that's always what's been the core motivator for me making games. It's not, oh, it could make this kind of money. To me, it's like, as long as it can keep the lights on while we do what we love to do, that's the number one goal. And if it gets great success, awesome. That's cool. But number one is like, let's, strike that joy in people's hearts, and let's just keep making these games.
And those tend to be the studios that make the best games, because I think it's the things that you can see when passion shines through, rather than it being a checklist, right? It's like you're putting this time in, and then putting in those extra hours for something that you really care about. It's like, oh, this isn't working properly, or this animation isn't smooth enough, and it's like you want to do that. You're not doing it to check something off. You're doing it because you're like, oh, how cool will this look when we finally get that done?
And we did that in our mobile games too, which was why they probably didn't really fit perfectly for mobile, because it was like they were really like gamey games. Like you can actually just YouTube Tapsmith secrets, and you're gonna see there's so many hidden secrets and Easter eggs in that game that we put in just for fun for people to discover, and there were people just trying to hunt for them. In Tiny Rails, there's these like secrets. There's at one point Godzilla can come on the train tracks, and there's this whole like they're crazy. And that was just one idea one of the programmers had here, and did it over the weekend.
I was like, how fun would that be? Like,
oh yeah, there's a really cool moment actually in Kung Fu Z, and excuse me if I get sentimental, but my 18 or 19-year-old dog passed away when we were working on that. She was the office dog. She'd come in every day, and she'd just hang out with everyone. It was amazing, and we'd always give her cucumbers. And I came back in, and that same programmer over the weekend put a secret in that you could throw a cucumber. You found and throw a cucumber, and then out of nowhere you'd see rough, and he'd come running in. Zoe would jump in, grab the cucumber, do this crazy move to obliterate all enemies. Then you get little hearts come up from her, and then she runs off the screen. And I
waterworks immediately. Like you couldn't not. Yeah.
I immediately just started like going, like just crying. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. And it was just such a cool moment. So that's the kind of stuff we like to inject in our games. And while we did that on mobile, I think in PC and console, I think there's going to be much more appreciation for that level of
for sure
passion towards things, and they notice those things a lot more. So we're already starting to put some of those in Ember Knights, but once we get the foundation there, it's just going to be jammed full of stuff like that. Like we love doing those things, those little Easter eggs. It's those moments of like, that was really cool. That's what we go for. That's our currency. That's what we go. That's what we try and accumulate, right?
And you're absolutely right. PC and console, like you're definitely gonna find like that type of fan base. Like I'm that type of fan base. Like that's the stuff that I look for. That's stuff that I love. Like I'm not a big mobile guy at all. But like that's you find those little things. You're like, wait, has anyone else found this? And it's something that you like look up, and there's like a few other people that are like, that was crazy. Like, how did you do that? Like,
yeah. So that's what we love to do. That's what we want to do. Yeah,
I love those moments, and that actually kind of like leads into it. Like one of the last questions I have for you is, more recently in career, you started joining different boards, so including Interactive Ontario. So at what point in your career did you kind of look back and be like, okay, this is the time for me to make this pivot and me to kind of give back? Because you're saying like you want to make these games to inspire people and for people to enjoy them, so it's like this is kind of the next step in that. So I'm just curious of what attracted you to start trying to split off some of your incredibly valuable time, again being one of the busiest people I have ever met, that now you're even like putting more time into these things.
Yeah, so I've always wanted to again build communities. So even beforehand, like I started the original game dev meetup in London, and it was like once a month, we get together with game devs and just share stories and relax and have a good time. So I was always like trying to do those things. We'd go to Fanshawe and I would do talks at Fanshawe. We'd have what was called a pro day that my buddy organized, and we'd go in and we'd like mentor with some of the students there. And for one day, we'd make a project, right? So it was just like I always loved doing that. I'll never say no to anyone asking for advice or hey, how do I do this? Like I don't know how many people over the years have asked me about like hey, I'm thinking about doing my own thing. Hey, let's sit down and talk. I love doing that kind of stuff. I love helping out with people and all that. So the opportunity first came up for Ontario Creates, and they asked if I'd be part of the advisory board because I've been very close with them over the years, working on different projects and stuff like that. So they asked me to join that. So absolutely, that sounds amazing. And then yeah, it was about a year and a half ago. Lucy reached out and Jeff asked if I wanted to be part of a board of directors on Interactive Ontario. I was like, well, that sounds amazing too. And I definitely have a problem with saying no because my time is definitely very minimal right now. But it's hard to pass up a cool opportunity like that where you can help shape some of the industry that is your life, right? So yeah, so I'm on those two boards now, and yeah, trying to ship a game and run a game and hobby store, and then also deal with the building stuff while being a dad and husband and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty crazy.
A little hectic, yeah. I think a lot of people for our lives have slowed down a little bit during the pandemic. I feel like yours really just is going up and up and up and up.
There was definitely no slowdown during the pandemic. It was just
I think we're very lucky as an industry for that. I try to bring that up as often as I can with people that are in the industry, and just being like we are uniquely lucky for that. I think the industry's only gotten up and up and up, and I think working remote, right, can be really, really good. Especially we were making comments before, we're talking like some people tend to be a little more introverted, or it tends to like I think a lot of people can actually do their best work. Like I'm in communications, and like I like working from home. I miss meeting people. I miss being in person and going to some of these events. But I think that day to day, I think you can get more done in a day, especially when your time is limited. Cutting out that commute, I think, is a major benefit for people's work-life balance. While instead of finishing a day at 7 at night, right, and already being a late night, and then it's 8:30 till you get home, and it's a whole other thing, rather than computer, laptop, close, I'm home.
Yeah, it to me, honestly, it's a tricky one because I'm a bit on the flip side of that. Like it's nice that we can do that, but to me, the real magic happens
as a team,
spontaneously.
Yeah,
and it's not like, well, let's spin up a Slack call and see what comes from that. It's like, hey, whoa, check this out. Hey, yeah, that'd be really cool if that did. And it's just I found like during the initial part of the pandemic, it was like when we were working from home, that it was really we lost that.
Hard to find that magic.
Yeah, and just that like those quick conversations that help lead to potentially major changes and all that. It was just like you felt disconnected as a team, I thought. Definitely better for the individual side of things in some regards, right? I know quite a few people here too are like, I miss being around people when I'm working, right? Like I don't like being at home all by myself. I'm not as inspired. I'm not as excited. I need that social interaction too. Especially like I think in our industry, yes, there's a lot of introverted people, but even introverted people, it's like I still need that sense of don't talk to me, but I still need a sense of like I'm with people.
I think it's just human nature.
Yeah. Like I get powered up by being around people and hey, let's talk, let's come up with ideas, let's build community. I love that stuff, but a lot of people in this industry aren't like that. But I think there is still that element of like I still want to be part of it, just don't put the spotlight on me kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I know certainly it did affect our team a little like that. So after about 4 or 5 months of lockdown, we're like, okay, we're back in. Let's go. Like, because we had a lot of like juniors and kind of homegrown guys too. So it's like it's different if you got senior this, senior that.
Exactly, right.
They can get it done, but it's like a lot of those ones need a little more hands-on and stuff like that.
Hands-on mentorship, and I think you can kind of lose that.
Definitely.
I definitely agree with that. I think like with certain parts of the industry, it's definitely not benefited, but like I think people have still managed to like stay on their feet. I think that might be a better way of putting that. Rather than I don't think we're thriving under this situation, but I think that we were uniquely situated exactly to kind of keep going, and then until we can get back in person and get back to the way that we were before. I just think we were uniquely situated to kind of we didn't have to close our doors. We were able to work
100%.
online, still keep creating, still keep
And it's nice that we have that
posting.
door open, right? Like if you're not
Hmm.
feeling well, or it's like, look, I just need a day. I got some odds and ends. I'm gonna work from home. I can still get stuff done. It's not like it's nothing
Hmm.
happens. It's just not optimal. So
Yeah, my dog's
it's nice
sick.
that door's there. Yeah.
You can stay home
Yeah.
and you can still get the job done, and then I'll be in the office tomorrow,
Yep.
and it just kind of
Yep.
benefits instead
Yeah.
of having to take that whole day. Like it makes it a
Yeah.
little
We
bit
are very
easier.
fortunate in that regard. Our industry can handle that, right?
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
the last thing I have for you today,
sure.
you turned a corner in your career, I would say. So when it comes to this new phase, Ember Knights, board of directors, the shop, like you obviously have all these things going on. Have you taken a second to sit back and think, okay, I'm doing all these things and like very now? Have you taken back to see, okay, what's the next phase?
I
Like,
have,
what's the big
and
picture?
it's gonna sound silly to you, I'm sure, Scott.
I
But
doubt it.
I often joke with my friends. I'm like, you know what I really want to do? Like, what? I'm like, I want to work on a trail. They're like, what? I'm like, I want to hop on an ATV, ride out, and just chop down some trees and make a really cool trail and some properties. That's what I really
That
want
does
to do
not
now.
remotely sound silly to me at all. That sounds
It's like,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, that's like, I get up for the day, have a nice breakfast, and I'm gonna go work on the trail for a bit. So that's like, that's what I really want to do next. I've been going like crazy for a while, and ultimately, like, it comes down to I like to build stuff, so I'll always be around this kind of industry, and I always want to make games. But right now, I certainly feel strong pull to be like, I need a breather from the computer stuff. I just want to like kind of get reconnected to like I grew up in the country when I was younger, right? Like I love the outdoor stuff too. And anytime I'm away from the computer for a little bit, it's like I get totally wrapped up in that. And it's like I love that stuff. Like going on like my bike trips, like they're weeks long. And I'm just like I got a backpack on the bike and we're riding. Like the last one I did was in it was right before Dash Quest launched, and a buddy and myself we rode down to Pennsylvania, shot across over to the coast, rode up all the coast through the U.S., all around PEI, all around Nova Scotia, ferried over to Newfoundland, rode up to the top, ferried over to Labrador, all up through Labrador, top of Quebec, all the way back down in like 3 weeks. And it was incredible. Like I love that adventure side of things too. But then it was like, come back. Okay, now let's ship Dash Quest, right? So I've always been like a very, as you can probably tell from some stories, I'm all in on whatever I'm doing, but I'm also all over. So it's like, I'm in this right now, but then I can like, boom, okay, I'm over here, and now I'm making a really cool trail somewhere. And then it's like, oh, I want to build this again. So now I'm all in on that again. So the biggest thing right now is like I want to get kind of reconnected with. I mean, after COVID too, my diet's gone to shit. You know, I just started working out again and all that. So it's like I want to get back into that, like get that lifestyle back on track to where it was, you know, and just a little more connection with the outdoors again. And then I'm sure I'll do that for a bit, then be like, I got this idea and I want to build this, right? So we'll see how that all balances out in the end, but that's kind of where my mindset is.
For a lot of people that have that like hyper focus mentality, right, where you like you do one thing and you really focus on it, a lot of people tend to maybe not see everything all the way through. You do. What are some of the like tips and tricks for the way that your brain works that you make it work for you rather than
Yeah.
against you of pulling yourself out of things and you're kind of able to see things through and then move on?
It is funny you say that because that's something that's come up a lot, you know, when I talk to some people, because especially like when you're making a game too, because you're like, oh, here, check it out, and it's like it's little gray blocks going, "Whew," but I'm like, oh, it's gonna look like this and all that, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like it's just gray blocks and all that. So it's really translating that vision to people. I think is what um, is really important as like a creative leader in a team, because you have to have an idea of what that'll be because you're selling that idea to everyone on the team who's working on it. So tips and tricks to actually get that, I think honestly it's probably just experience. It's like there's no book you're going to read that's like that's how I do it. It's like sit down and make something. Sit down and start with a blank piece of paper, start writing something out, a blank piece of code, start putting something together. So you've been through the process so many times. Like I've built so many things now from start to finish, small scale, large scale. That's like I know what it's going to be like by the time it gets there. So it's like I have developed that skill, but I can't actively say like, well, you know, take this course or do this. I think it's a matter of doing. Like it's just sit down and you know, there's a lot of obstacles in the way of doing everything. But it's like just try not to get overwhelmed by them. Make a list of them. Actually, you know what? Maybe that is something I can say is that one of the things I do is I have a Google Doc open at all times on my computer and my phone. And whenever I think of anything that could be part of what I have to do, I put it in there. So it's like I always have a list of it's my to do, and it's like 20 pages long, and it's never ending, which can be its own problem.
Yeah.
But it's like, when you're like honestly, like getting into this building and going, okay, how do we? Because it needed to be fully renovated. So it's like, how do I acquire this building? How do I renovate it? How do I get it set up for 2 businesses as soon as possible? How do I deal with all these contractors? How do I get it up to code? Da, 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 da. So it's incredibly overwhelming for someone that's never done that before. But it's like, lay them out, right? And systematically just go, okay, I'm going to start dealing with these right now. This will come, but try not to get overwhelmed. Work through your list, see the list, delete it from the list so you feel like you actually achieved something on that. That helps keep driving you forward. Because if it's like I've had some days and it's like if I didn't write down things I was doing, I'd be like, what did I do today? I didn't even do anything.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's like, oh, I did 12 things that weren't even on the list to do, but they came up and you have to deal with them. Like that's one thing, as a business owner, it's like you get curveballs left and right. And it's like some days it's like you have no idea what you're dealing with. And it's like, oh, I got this thing from the CRA I got to figure out now, and I got to track down this and this and this. Or, hey, there's an issue with one of the employees you got to do. Okay, da 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 da. And it's you're dealing with curveballs left and right all the time. So put it in the list and just start when you got that free time. Start chipping away on the list. I think is probably the best way to help develop that means to completion of something, right? And that might it sounds silly. Like I literally put in my list today, do podcast with Scott, right? Because then it's like I done it, boom, doom, delete out of the list. I did that today because it just helps the mental state too. Because otherwise it can feel like a never-ending treadmill of like I'm just always doing stuff, which we are. We're humans. We always have to. But at least there, it's like it gives you that little like, yeah, I did that, right?
Sense of completion.
I put in there, work out, boom, did that too. It shouldn't feel like a job to do, but it's something you have to do during that day. So put it in your list and delete it from your list, and you get that sense of completion. And you're like, okay, not too bad. I did some stuff today. So that's how I've always approached it. And to me, like it's fun. Like when somebody's like, hey, I want to, what about a business like this? I'm like, yes. How do we build that? Because it's like that's where you want to be. This is where we are. It's a puzzle. It's just like making a game, right? I want to make a Metroidvania. Boom. Cool. We're here. We have nothing. How do we get there? And it's a giant puzzle. I always describe that. People are like, what's making a game like? It's a giant puzzle or a giant problem, and it's got a million problems with their own indefinite potential problems from it, and you just have to start figuring them out one at a time, and they'll all have little tendrils of problems that you're just trying to solve, and then ultimately that solution of problems is what the game became, right? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, but that's kind of the process of making the game. It's one big problem. How are we going to do this? How is it going to be fun? How does the player move? How da 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 da. So yeah, that's probably the best advice I can give on that.
I think that's probably the best way we could end the podcast. I think that's a great advice for a lot of people to take, including myself. So Jeff, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Everybody,
thanks for having me.
Go download the Ember Knights combat demo. Check that out. Keep an eye out for early access. I know I will be. I'm very excited. I'm your host, Scott Milley. This has been the Lodgge Podcast, episode 6, brought to you by Interactive Ontario. Jeff, thank you again for joining me today. And I would love to have you back. Maybe when we get a launch date, release date, sure. You and me can go through and we can really dive in and talk about some of the things you want to bring up. So thanks again, and everybody take care.
Cool. Thanks, Scott. Take care.